Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I see a lot of familiar names and faces. I miss you all, and I'm glad you tuned in. I'll start by introducing myself to those who have never met me or don't know who I am. My name is Maria Rocha. I manage Realist Ventures. I'm also one of the founding members of HAYVN Hatch, which is usually where we hang out every couple of months. And like to introduce Maia Bittner, who I met on Twitter. We just happened to hit it off over coffee and has graciously agreed to help us out today.
You're like an amazing community here. I have an entrepreneurial background. And more recently, I spend a lot of time investing and advising in early stage startups. And so excited to jump in and kind of speak to some do's and don'ts that Maria and I have around pitch decks today.
All right. So I'm sure Maya as well, we get several hundreds of decks per month. I mean, per day. Well, I'm sorry, per month. And even for Hatch, we usually get about 30 or so out. And so we thought it was kind of interesting right now would be a good time to kind of go through the do's and don'ts. We focus more on the do's because it's a lot of information to cover in 20 minutes. So your initial decks, one of the things I noticed, a lot of them have very creative graphics that are unnecessary. And so you want to state your mission, make sure it's legible, and really try to keep your deck under 15 to 20 minutes so it's not too wordy, because we don't like reading them as much as you hate writing them, and so it's really trying to find that right balance. So we kind of wanted to go over some of that, the do's and don'ts a little bit, but really trying to cram as much as possible for this presentation.
Yeah, and so I think, right, it's like we get so many decks that we really have a finite amount of time to devote to looking at any one deck. And so often the experience of reviewing a deck is flipping through. And so the takeaway message needs to be really, really clear on every slide. And if there's lots and lots of details or it's really text heavy, personally, I'm more likely to skip that and not get the message at all. Rather than be able to devote the time to reading all the text on it.
I don't know. Kathy, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Sorry. So one of the things that we, as Maya said, we are always on time constraints. So it's really important for you to right away state your problem, but without it being wordy, and assume that we know nothing about the industry that you've researched and spent a ton of time learning about. And so really hope, you want to capture our attention within the first 20 seconds max. I know it's really hard to do, but it needs to happen. We like see something and be wowed by what you're doing. And if it's a paragraph, that's helpful to you. But when I'm looking at, say, 30 or so decks a day on a mild day, I guess sometimes, it needs to really capture my attention. And some of you guys know, my email's online, so it's really hard, as Maya's easily accessible online as well.
Yeah, so and one of the shortcuts that I often recommend people on the problem slide is, since I'm likely to be new to the industry and not understand how big the problem is or how deep the problem is, I recommend that people speak to how much money people spend trying to solve this problem today, or how much like effort and time and hassle they spend, right? So like if you have a problem slide that says, 90% of Americans don't always take off their shoes when they enter in their house. It's like, okay, that's a problem, but it's not clear to me that there's a big business opportunity there. And it would communicate it much faster to me if you said, Americans spend $250 million on products just addressing this problem, or they spend 5 hours a week addressing this, then I would be like, wow, 5 hours a week. Like if you could create a product that gave them that time back, that would be really, really valuable. So those are two shortcuts that I often give people, like in order to convey the problem, like really clearly and really, really concisely.
Kathy?
I think let's do next slide, Kathy, please.
Thank you. I can't see you guys, so just give me the heads up.
Yeah, I'm texting you next. I guess you're not. Yeah, sorry about that. And quickly after problems, I know sometimes, you know, I actually saw a deck this morning where the solution was at the end. That's not very helpful either. And I only took a look at it because I was giving feedback on that specific deck. But we want to know that you have a problem, and right after what your solution is, because I have a ton of problems with no solutions. And so we want to know that where you are. Do you have a product yet or service that you're up? Do you have a MVP? Do you have customers? Because often we get decks where people are solving problems with our customers, and as you know, acquiring customers can be very expensive. And so we want to know that you've identified a pool of people who are going to purchase said product. And also some screenshots would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I love seeing like the most narrow definition of an ideal customer possible, even understanding that, you know, everybody might buy this product or it's got a really broad range. That's fine, but when founders say that, I often worry that they don't really understand who they're trying to acquire as a core customer and who they're designing their solution for. And so even though, like, we'll get into market sizing later, and even though like we're hopefully all creating products for a really big market, I love seeing like our initial target customer is first generation college students who are people of color and make on average $75,000 a year and live in one of the top 3 metro areas in the US, or something like that, like really, really tight. Those people, right, that's a really small group of people, but it's understood that that's not the entire customer base, but that's who the product is designed for. And that's going to be the initial customer, and then it'll expand beyond there.
Yes, go.
Sorry, I'm texting you. I'm trying to. Okay, so I don't know if Maya, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so right, and this leads kind of what I was saying with the initial target customer, right? So these are a bunch of different ways to talk about your total addressable market, your initial market share, and the different pieces of it, right? So as an investor, I want to know that this can be a big business and is going after a really, really big market size. And then having thoughtful ways to divide up what you're starting with and what your final market size can be. It's a little bit, you know, disheartening when I see someone say, you know, this is a $10 billion market size, and so if we just get 1% of that, that's a $100 million business. Because I don't think just 1% is easy to do or is reasonable. And instead, I like seeing really, really thoughtful ideas about the market dynamics, how fragmented are the existing products that address this problem, and how you're gonna approach getting whatever percentage of the market it is, 1, 10, 50, 100, is like often what I look like for here in the market size slide.
Similarly, I think it's always important for startups to understand, or founders to understand, that as investors, we're looking at the billion-dollar industries for the most part. And so if your target market is small, it's a great business for you, but it may not necessarily be a great business from an investor's point who's looking for X amount of their return. And so it's really, really important. And we see a lot of decks where people don't spend enough time on that. Instead, they kind of just like, you know, they'll assume or fabricate a number. They think people, they think we will assume that that's going to work. But truthfully, you can only get a small percentage of the market share. So that's a very important slide to spend some time researching and getting accurately.
Right.
This is my favorite part. Not really, but this is also a very difficult one, and one that you have to spend, again, a lot of time sorting out. Most of the times, you know, we get either too many competitors on a slide or too little. And sometimes, at least for me, when I get that, I assume you did not spend enough time researching your product or service. And so it's really important to really identify, sometimes a quick Google search or Crunchbase, there are plenty of resources where you can identify some of that. And if you can't really set yourself apart from those competitors, and not just logos, but really go into the cost difference, whether there's some convenience to customers, whether you have something that differentiate you from the next person. IP always helps. Patents, whatever you can, or some traction, those are always helpful.
Yeah, and I think, right, this competitive advantages, right, you don't need to have all of these. And in fact, I think it's often strongest if you have one or two that is really, really strong, right? So it's like, look, frankly, our product is basically exactly the same as this other product, but we can offer it at 100th of the cost because of these structural advantages that we built. That's really strong. That's great. You don't need anything else besides being able to offer the same thing at 100th of the price. And I think, right, particularly if you're working on a product in a landscape where a bunch of people have gone after this problem and failed, I want to see something here about, like, why are you going to succeed when everyone else has failed in this market? And so, and then a little bit in here, it's also how you're going to build your moat. Like, if this is such an amazing opportunity and you have an amazing product, like, what about future competitors that don't even exist yet? How are you going to defend against those and basically defend what you've won in this space?
Okay. Oh, growth strategy. This is often a really tough one. And we get it as investors because you don't know. Like, you may have a marketing plan and it goes completely out the window because of, well, a pandemic, for example, or more competitors than you anticipated. So for me, I just like to see that you have a plan to grow. Because again, I've built platforms with apps that went nowhere because I had no plan and or they were just mostly for me. That's why it's important to have customers. And so part of that is really educating yourself or aligning yourself with the right co-founder and team that will help you with that growth. Sorry.
Yeah, I basically have nothing to say that's different from what Marie said. Like, the plan is what's important here. And even if your plan is, hey, we don't know what channel is going to perform best for us, our plan is to spend this amount of money and this amount of time testing each of the following channels and then choosing the one that performs the best to invest our strategy into. Like, that's a plan, you know, like, that shows me that you're thinking about it and you're being deliberate about it. And, you know, you kind of understand some of the dynamics that underlie your customer acquisition costs and different marketing channels. That works. And yeah, as investors, we get that, you know, the plan changes constantly, but what's important is to go through that process of having a plan and knowing what you're going to do and how you're going to respond to the feedback you learn along the way.
Kathy? Oh, okay. You want to take this one, Maya? This is
Sure.
often,
Yeah. I really like the business model piece. And, you know, I invest at a really early stage. So does Marie. So often, again, it's like these haven't been proven out. And so what I'm looking for in the business model is really does it seem reasonable at all? Like I asked someone once about their business model, and they said that they really liked this like affordable, it was like 99 cents a month business model. And I said, I was like, look, it's just not going to work. Like, you would have to have the number of customers you would have to have paying 99 cents a month to make this a big business. And just understanding, you know, I know a little bit about what their COGS are going to look like and what their costs will look like. Like, it's pretty skinny margins. It's never going to be a $1 billion business charging customers 99 cents a month. They need something else on top of that. And so that's what I'm looking for here. It's like, oh, okay. So I'm looking for, is it reasonable? And then I'm looking for the team. So if it's, you know, if it's a direct to consumer product, you really have to have that paid advertising team and somebody who knows Facebook ads inside and out and that whole market. If you're doing direct sales, right, you need a sales team. If you're doing a freemium model, it's like you really need those in-app product designers and people who can focus on the experience and stuff like that. So that's usually what I'm trying to check out on this slide is it reasonable? Can it be a $1 billion business, just back of the envelope roughly? And are you creating the right team for the business model you've chosen for your company?
And often too, I'll add, I agree with everything you said, but it's time and there are resources to look into. And often people will, like we will get, I get decks where it's a freemium model that actually should be the other way and should have a small percentage and it involves asking a lot of feedback to get to that place sometimes. So spend as much time as you can on this area because it makes a huge difference for us and also the questions you're going to have to encounter later. It's best for us to have like very meaningful feedback and questions for you versus trying to help you develop your business model during a pitch presentation.
Oh, and that reminds me, so you might have to be really creative sometimes in order to find a good business model. And so one of the things I encourage people to brainstorm is to look at the value that your product is creating in the world. And then if for whatever reason whoever receives that value isn't the best way to capture it or to get your revenue from, to try and brainstorm who else in the world is benefiting from the value that you're creating. And could you maybe tie your business model to them? So like one of my companies, we reported people's rent payments to the credit bureau so they could build their credit score just by paying their rent. It's great, right? We could sell it directly to them, but that has a limited amount. So we brainstormed, we're like, well, who else is benefiting from people having better credit scores? And can we somehow work with them to create a better business model? So like if there are people who apply to a loan and they don't qualify for a loan, maybe the lender could send those people to us and we could do that work to increase their credit score so that they apply for the loan. And the lender benefits, the consumer benefits, and there's sort of like different opportunities there. So that's something that I also encourage people to do is sort of brainstorm. It's like, are there other people out there in the world who might be benefiting and who might have bigger pocketbooks that you can talk to?
And I'll also add really quickly, think beyond the next year, because sometimes your business model needs to adjust. So I think sometimes we see these projections that are not always, I mean, and again, they're projections, right? But still, really think about what your product could look like in 5 years. I always think 5 years out, what if, 5G or like technology change or anything like that? It's really important to really think about that. And that usually helps with some of the changes that you need to tweak. Okay, this has a lot. Again, it's so hard to like cram all of this in 30 minutes. And I spent so much time like trying to like narrow it down. And I think I started with more information than I needed to, but this is very important. And again, we do know these are assumptions and you're not beholden to them, but you should have a plan and it should be laid out and we should see very clearly how we're going to get our money back and how you're going to, you know, get to the billion-dollar company or whatever your goals are. And so I often find that financial models do not include things like your burn rate. Very simple. What will it take to monthly to get there? Because often what founders do, they either raise too little or they attempt to raise too little or too much. And so if you're raising $1 million, I'd like to know exactly where it's going and all of these, which we'll get the slides out to you if you guys want, but all of these are very important to at least think about and really try your best to include in your financials.
Yep, I have nothing to add here. With everything Reed said, we can keep cruising on.
Okay. Okay.
The
Do you want to
team,
go, Maya?
yeah, I can jump into this. I really like thinking about, you're right, I feel like this is such a strong window into how someone is choosing to build their company and who they've enlisted to be on their side in that process. And so with the role, so if you have co-founders and if you have other people on your team, I'm always really, really interested in how you've divided up your responsibilities. I think that, right, co-founder breakups and problems with teams are one of the most common reasons that early stage startups fail to get off the ground and don't make it. And so I'm curious always to learn about the process behind dividing up different roles and responsibilities within the company. With advisors, then I'm looking to see, basically, do you have advisors that fill in the gaps with your skill set? And I'm going to be curious if I think there's big holes there. And this is the same thing, like, you know, I said on the business model, I really wanted to see that your team supported that. If you don't have direct sales expertise on your team and that's your business model, you got to at least have an advisor in that area. And hopefully you use this advisor to help build out the team and bring that support in-house. So basically it's like within the areas of the industry that you're approaching, the business model that you're choosing to approach it with, the target customer group, and the specific product, whatever you don't have experience with amongst your team, I hope that you supplement those gaps with advisors. And then if you don't, I'm really gonna be a little bit worried about that or try to recommend people that you might be able to bring on your team to help you.
Totally. Those are very important. Again, yesterday, saw another deck where the last page were just 2 images of the founders. That's great, but I need to know what experience you have. And if it's 0, that's fine. You have an opportunity to connect with great advisors that can help you with that and mentors. But just your photo, or my favorite ones are the ones that include dogs and children, which again, lovely, but not necessary when we have iPhones and Androids where you could take like a simple photo, simple background, and just a headshot of yourself. That's plenty. And it's so important for us to see the core of that team, because we're expecting you to build your company with those 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And so if it's just you and your dog, and it's not a company that's like in the pet industry, that just tells me that you don't care. And so one rule for me when I get a deck, I go backwards. I look at the financials first. Don't ask. That's the first thing I go to. Problem, then financials. And so this way I try to like go through it as I see fit. Assume that that might be some other investors, that they're going to go straight to your team to see if you are capable of handling the product or service you're offering. And so if you're in bioscience, which is an area that I invest in a lot, and you have no experience in, you don't have a degree in biology or chemistry or anything like that, it's kind of difficult for me to assume you're going to build out this product and etc. And it's very tricky now because I know we're all trying to figure out next steps. Should we, a lot of funds are still investing, some aren't. So if you are pitching or if you are sending your deck, you have to really spend the time and be concise. And there are a lot of people who are willing to give feedback. And sometimes it's just your parents, even anyone, your college roommate, whatever. Just really spend the time and go online. There are plenty of resources as well that you can tap into. I don't know if Maya wanted to add any more.
Nope, we can move to the next slide.
Basically that's
that's it.
that's where we wrap it up.
Oh,
Because I didn't think we could fit this all in 30 minutes. So less, not 30 minutes, but
well,
I think we have some questions.
Bunch of questions. So yeah.
So why don't we start? Sorry, I'm jumping in here. Kathy Blood again. I just want to go back to the beginning of the chat and just see what we have for questions as you guys were talking. I don't actually see anyone who put the word question there, but let's see if I can. It looks like Christine had a question. It's a long blurb. Given that we're in unprecedented times, that is impacting most business negatively, how to frame the uncertainty within your pitch deck. Usually it's best to be confident, but in these crazy times, is it better to pitch or hold off on pitching given the uncertainty?
So I knew that question was coming, but I knew someone would be asking. I did pull, I'm sure Maya have seen it too. There, I have a list on Google Drive. I'll share my email if you want to email me. I can send it to you. But there are funds who are still investing. In fact, a lot of them are looking for opportunities right now because they assume that a lot of people will not be pitching. So if you're clear on your model and you are ready to go, do it. I don't think, obviously you can expect yes, but this is a great opportunity to pitch, in my opinion. I've been seeing more decks actually lately than I had, say, 2 months ago. So,
yeah, and just to address like framing the uncertainty, kind of the earlier part of Christine's question, I think it's similar to the uncertainty around what your customer acquisition is going to look like and how your business model is going to plan out, which is that, said this a couple of times, but having a plan is the most important part rather than necessarily what the plan is or sticking to the plan come hell or high water. And so I think it's looking at like if no one is buying your product because of this, it's a crazy pandemic that's happening, right? I think you can say, okay, no one's buying our product. So instead what we've decided to do is we are going to invest in our community online, right? Stuff like HAYVN, until this is kind of on the other side. And by building up that community during this time, once this is over, we're going to have this huge customer base that's excited to buy our product and we're going to launch it then, right? So just like showing that you're working with, like, always kind of address the elephant in the room. I think right now it's a pandemic, but frankly, 3 months ago, the elephant in the room was outrageously high customer acquisition costs on Facebook. And like, I always say, like, address it head on. Like, here's how you're going to approach it. Like, here's how you're going to do things differently and not fall prey to the problems here. And I don't think no one is an expert in pandemics also. So I think it's fine that you don't know the right way to do, but just understand that you need a plan that's going to be flexible. And it's like, we don't know how long this is going to last. Here's what we're going to do in the meantime. Here's how we're going to prepare ourselves to be in a good position on the other side of it.
Yeah, that was a great question from Christine Sullivan, one of our key former Hatch judges, by the way. So thanks, Christine. We have a question from Jeff Cohen, one of our former Hatch presenters. He asks, with startups evolving so much all the time, how often should you be updating your pitch deck?
Often. I think I often tell people, if present and you get feedback, take a look again, because there might be something that you missed. And often, if, for example, if you present or pitch and investors or anyone have questions about your business model, time to do a little bit of research and revamp on your business model. And I think it's important to I'm not pitching anything, but I still revert my deck every so often when I learn something new. So be familiar with market trends, changes, and etc. But you should be updating it as often as possible. And if you don't get an investment, that's sometimes what I mean. It's time to also take a look at the flow of your deck, because it may not necessarily be the content, but the flow may be off. So perhaps you lead with something else, moves, so that's also another advice I often give.
Anything for Maia?
I agree with Marisa, which is often, and just to add to the value of that, I often use my pitch deck not just to pitch investors on the opportunity, but to send to all kinds of people, right? Like I would send it to prospective employees. I would say, by the way, I want to make sure you understand how we're representing our business and the opportunity here. I'd send it to potential advisors. I would send it to even, the PR firm we hired, like, by the way, this is our pitch deck. This is how we represent the building. And so I use the pitch deck, not just when I was pitching investors, but throughout the course of running the business. And so I always wanted to make sure it was something I was proud of and kind of updated it all the time in order to fine tune it.
Thank you. So we have a question from Alif, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Fatherly. How many pages is ideal for the presentation? Is it 10?
Okay. We get this a lot. Again, I'm part of the reviewing team for HAYVN Hatch, and sometimes we get decks that are 30 pages. We do try and limit them to 5 slides. So I'm a strong believer that for an actual presentation, it should be no more than 10. And if you find yourself looking for graphics to fill the pages, you do not need it, because they're just fillers, and they are frustrating for me as well. I don't know about Maia, but certainly for me. I try to tell founders they should have a 30-second pitch ready to go. What do? Quickly blurt it out. A 1-minute pitch if someone's more interested in your 30 seconds. 3 minutes max. You need to be able to cram everything in 3 minutes in the event that you're presenting somewhere and we're crunch on time. And so with HAYVN, that's why we keep it down to 3 minutes. And we're always getting questions, why can it be 5 minutes long? Our attention span is not that, not just mine, but in general, our attention span just, if you can't wow me in 3 minutes, then not that it's not that interesting, but I also one thing I want to bring up, if you're up there for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I was on Zoom, they're 10 minutes long, which is too long because I'm only paying attention for the first 3 minutes anyway. But for 10 minutes, then you open yourself up to all sorts of like verbiage and fillers, and so my sweet spot is 5 to 10 slides. That, and also for intros, I even encourage 1-pagers. If you just want to send me something just to get some ideas, 1-pagers are great, but like 5 to 10 slides for intros are great. Then beyond that, we can go into financials and et cetera, really understand your business model. If I'm interested after 10 slides, then I usually reach out.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the skill of being a founder, is that you need to flip between the super high level 30-second pitch, and then you go back to work, right? And at work, you're dealing with a bug in the forgotten password flow, and you're dealing with, like, are we paying $32.30 for a customer or $32.40, right? Like, you're dealing with the very low level nitty gritty. And then you have to turn around and you have to tell an investor how, for me, I was like, we are building a next gen credit bureau in 10 years, right? And you have to flip back and forth between the very high level and the very nitty gritty details. And I think in the pitch, I was tempted, and founders are often tempted to show how much they're working in the nitty gritty and how they have this detail of low level, but that's not the right thing for investors. I think, 5-slide teaser deck. And frankly, even as an investor now, I participate in a ton of roundtables and groups where we all bring investments and we talk about them. And then if people are interested, they can choose to invest. And so I'm pitching startups relatively often. And sometimes I'm notorious for this. We'll be at the end of the meeting and we'll be all wrapping up. And I'll say, can I have 60 seconds to pitch one more company? And they always
Yep.
go, yeah, Maya, like you have 60 seconds. And I'm like, okay, here it is. And I give a 60-second pitch.
Wow.
And then they're like, that's awesome. Like, I want an introduction to the founder now. So it's like, if I can pitch other people's companies in 60 seconds, like the founder needs to be able to pitch it in 60 seconds too.
And that is key. And why I ask for short decks and short presentations, because even for Hatch, I go back and I like present it to my group. And if your business model, or if it's just too long and I can't wordy and I can't remember exactly what you do, it doesn't help you at all. And so we kind of share information as much as possible. We all have like our giant Slack group of, I don't know, like female investors of 2,000 or plus investors and others, and you want to be able to wow me right away, which is why it's important to be memorable. And that 60-second pitch is really important. If nothing else, you need to, like, because it shows passion too, that you really care so much about what you do that you can't help but blur it out in every minute you get. That's the other piece I like as well.
Okay, yeah, so we have another question from Alexis Brooks, who is our in-house legal expert at HAYVN. She and a little plug for HAYVN. We have resident experts, and our members can book them for a half an hour at a time to flesh out questions they might have on their business, from tech to legal to marketing. So it's kind of fun. So her question was, is it ordinary for you to receive NDAs prior to or following the review of a pitch deck, or is that a turnoff? And then there's people following up on that and responding to Alexis as well. So go ahead, guys.
I don't know if it's a turnoff, but, and this is going to sound very rude, we see a lot of pitch decks. So unless it's very memorable, I forget right away. Like I'm not, unless I'm advising, you've pitched at an event where I judge, or a friend, I usually don't like remember your pitch deck. So I think sometimes people think that, we're stealing ideas and therefore you should have, and sometimes it's a liability, I think, for us to even consider it, because we're listening to many pitch decks that are very similar. And so I don't know if it's a turnoff, but personally, if I get that, I don't even open it. My email filters for NDA, those initials. So I don't even open it, because I don't want to put myself in that position at all. And I deal with a lot of bioscientists who are bioscience startups, and they don't even send NDA either, because they kind of understand the industry, and we're not that invested until we're working with you per se. And so yeah, that's my policy on it. Don't do it. If you can help it, please don't do it.
Yeah, I think, somebody asked me this in kind of a one-on-one conversation. If they asked me for advice on should they send an NDA, should they not, I would take it one step higher level, and I would actually ask them, why do you want to send an NDA? And what are you worried about? And I almost think that that's the real thing to address. So if you're worried about someone stealing your product idea, I would tell them, you know what, you need to change your company so that anyone could steal your product idea and it wouldn't affect the success of your company. Like, you need to build in, right? If you're worried somebody's going to steal your idea and they're going to build it better, well, how can you build it better now? How can you build it faster? How can you get it to more people? How can you build the brand recognition? How can you build a community around you and your idea? Like, I would say, like, whatever you're worried about, you need to address that in a different way. Like, an NDA is like, it's a crutch. It's only going to work short term. It's going to prevent you from talking to investors. Like, it's not a good solution. I would figure out what you're trying to solve with an NDA and solve it in a more sturdy, like more reliable way.
So
Yeah.
I guess David Dameron's hashtag "don't do it" on NDAs is pretty much where you guys come down.
Well, it just shows insecurities that you haven't created a barrier to entry. Like that's one of the reasons why I don't read it. Either the person had, and it's bad because I do want people to reach me, but it's like either you don't have mentors to tell you not to do that, right? Or you haven't established what your like it. I just avoid it altogether. So yes, thank you, David. Don't do it.
So we've kind of reached the end of our normal Q&A, but we'd
Sure.
love if you guys can stay on and answer some more questions. We have one more in chat, but I do like to open it up to let people actually verbalize their questions. So I think what we'll do is, because Christine's asking another question, which is what sectors are you liking now? Maybe you can close with an answer to that. And I'm just gonna ask the people who are, like Holly, who just submitted one, why don't, if you have a question, unmute yourself, ask your question, and then please mute yourself again, just so we keep a nice clean audio. So first up, why don't you start it off, Holly, if you'd like to ask your question, and we'll close with Christine's question.
Oh, hi Marie, how are you?
Hi.
I was just wondering what you thought of e-commerce, I guess, in relation to retail, given the overall economy right now.
So it's tricky, but I think there's an opportunity here because I feel like a lot of companies are restructuring and moving online. There's a restaurant close by. For years, I've asked them to at least have online ordering and they could never figure it out, and they were able to launch something within a week's time. So I think when discussing e-commerce, what you're going to have to do now is really think about how to compete with Amazon more meaningfully. And by that I mean, what will keep I think now Amazon is not really doing Prime anymore, but how can you set yourself up so that you can get to your customers faster than they can? And e-commerce is tricky because I think for me, one of the things, like I've been seeing a lot of decks around PPEs lately, which is bizarre because I'm not sure how they're able to get supplies, but you have to just make sure that whatever your market is, that it's relevant right now, and that you do have a plan for delivery and logistics, because I think that's the biggest issue that people are worried about. But I don't hate e-commerce. It's not an area we've really invested in, but well, actually, I think Maya and we actually shared one, Relove, but yeah, it's a tricky one, but you do have to make sure that you have a plan because it's not the same as it used to be. And the companies that come out of this will be sustainable because this is a really hard time to build an e-commerce company, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, for market dynamics, there is something interesting I saw earlier this week, which is basically, historically we divide consumer spending into like essential and discretionary spending. And what some people are thinking is that there's kind of this category of new essentials, which is basically things that support our new stay-at-home lives and our new work-from-home lives. And that's things around entertainment in the home, video games, stuff that makes you comfortable. It's like self-care products that happen at home, and productivity stuff. And so I thought that was a really interesting play on a specific e-commerce category that might actually be doing better in these times.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a live question? Feel free to unmute yourself. Give that 5 more seconds for people to figure out where their unmute button is, like me. So I think, guys, if you want to close with that excellent question from Christine, which was pretty much, if you both could just say what you're liking now in this environment and what you've seen too much of possibly, and again, reiterate what you both like to invest in maybe.
Yeah, I can jump in and start here. So what I liked before the pandemic and also now during the pandemic and hopefully afterwards is actually kind of has stayed the same. So I really think that the cost of housing, education, healthcare, and transportation has become really astronomical and unaffordable for most people. And so I love startups that make those things more accessible. And so the ways that they can be more accessible, sometimes it's more affordable, but there are different ways of making things more accessible. And so I've invested in a bunch of companies like that. I like transportation, things that help people get around easily without owning a car. I'm particularly quite passionate about. Invested in basically a commuter bus company, as well as a next gen car rental company. And so, yeah, I'm most excited about things in that space. And then that continues to be true now, I think, with so many people losing their jobs and facing economic insecurity, it's only going to be more pressing to have these critical things be accessible.
Yeah. So some of you guys know bioscience and biotech are my favorite sectors, but I am thinking about that more in terms of like targeting healthcare issues post-COVID, just because I feel that obviously no one was prepared for this. And so I'm really looking at a lot of companies, or like hoping to find companies that are really targeting healthcare and research in terms of the sciences as well, because and then supply chain is my new one, just because I do have a company that we had already known about, like we've been dealing with the FDA and supply chain from China and India because it's a pharmaceutical company, but really interested in a lot of that too, just because I want to see how we proceed going forward with all these interruptions and supply chain, anything from toilet paper to just I think eggs. The other day a friend mentioned that she couldn't get access to, and so that's one. And then the other I've always cared about, which I haven't really come across anything that I like, and my dream is to make enough money to build my tiny home community for homeless and veterans. But that's something I'm really interested in, housing security, because I think I was once homeless, which is, we'll talk about that someday. But and I was lucky enough to have the opportunities. I knew how to code, so I was able to get out of that. But that's not everyone's story, and so really going forward, the cost of living is so high in general. And now we know the level of insecurity. I mean, just I've been looking at some data on just how little it takes for people to just lose everything. And sometimes it's as little as $400 or something like that. And so I really care a lot more about that. So I'm looking for people who are tackling a lot of these things that will make us I always say I don't have a social impact fund, but I really like companies that are looking for the betterment of everyone in the future. So.
Well, thank you, Maia, and thank you, Marie. Maia can actually be found. She has a website, maiabittner.com, I believe, correct?
I do. I'm most active on Twitter. It's kind of the best place to find what I'm up to, what the latest is, what I'm thinking about. I'm just at Maia B on Twitter.
Excellent. And Marie can be found at realistventures.com, and it's worth checking her out there. Marie is part of our—
Not really. There's not much there, but my email is there. I don't have as much as I talk about growth in marketing, I don't really market myself very well, but my email is on there. You can easily contact me if you need anything. And I also can send out that list of someone put it together, a colleague of investors or funds that are actively investing at the moment, with a very detailed spreadsheet. So just let me know and I'll email it to you.
And I know this throws Felicia kind of under the bus, but Felicia, I'd love for you to just end us with your closing shout out.
Well, this was a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for putting it together. Kathy did a great job organizing it. We were thrilled to have Maia here. I know you are super busy on the West Coast. I appreciate that. And Marie, as always, happy to have you as part of our advisory board and team, kind of coaching me through all this process too. So I learn something every time. And now I need to go rework my pitch deck. So thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thank you so much,
Bye,
Maia.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Yes.